The first thing I knew was the key burned into my hand. My eyes opened to a white ceiling, and the sensation on my left palm was a brand, a complex shape that screamed a single, desperate purpose into the void of my mind. It was a key, and I had to find the lock. This knowledge was everything I was. The rest of me was a blank slate. I felt a plastic tube taped to the back of my other hand, and I ripped it out, a small sting of pain that felt distant. I sat up, and the room was dead quiet, the kind of silence that happens when machines that were always on have finally stopped. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood, my entire body frail and unsteady. The key on my palm seemed to pulse with a phantom heat. I had to find the lock. I took one step toward the door, and my legs gave way. I fell hard onto the cold floor, my body a useless thing, and the silence of the great building pressed down on me from all sides. I used the bed frame to pull myself up again, my muscles shaking with the effort. My obsession was stronger than my weakness. The need to understand the scar, to follow its direction, pushed me forward. I moved out of the room into a long hallway. The air was stale and smelled of old chemicals and something else, something sweet and wrong. Bodies lay on the floor and in open doorways, people in white coats and blue scrubs, their skin a pale gray color. It was clear that some terrible sickness had come through this place. I stumbled past them, a ghost in a thin hospital gown, until I found an office with the door ajar. Inside, papers were scattered across a desk and the floor. I saw a recurrent title stamped in red ink on many of them, Project Prometheus. On the desk was a plastic security keycard. I picked it up. It had a photograph of a man with sharp cheekbones and haunted eyes. It was my face, but I felt no connection to it. Below the picture was a name, Dr. Gautam Kaihika. The name was just a collection of sounds. Embedded in the plastic next to my own picture was a smaller one of a young girl. She had large, dark eyes and a severe expression, her face captured in a stark, clinical photograph. Below her image were the words, "Subject, Prometheus." A powerful feeling surged through me, a sense of duty so absolute, it felt like the only real thing I had ever known. This was her. This was the lock. I put the keycard in the pocket of my gown, the girl's face now fused to the mission that burned on my palm. She was my daughter, and finding her was the only reason I was still breathing. I saw my reflection in the dark glass of a window, a stranger looking back at me. I whispered the name from the file. Prometheus. Then another name surfaced from the void, an instinct. Atika. The name felt like a prayer, the first solid piece of myself. I turned to the door, ready to find her. To get out, I needed something to protect myself, to open the way. I saw a fire axe behind a glass case on the wall. I took a heavy metal extinguisher from its mount and swung it against the case. The crash of the glass was a physical blow in the dead city, an immense sound that echoed down the empty halls. I took the axe, its weight feeling good and real in my hands. I used its sharp edge to break the lock on the hospital's main doors, and then I stepped outside into the world. The streets of Seattle were just as silent as the hospital. Cars were frozen in place, covered in rust and creeping vines. Weeds grew tall through cracks in the concrete. There were no birds, no engines, no voices. I stood there for a moment, making my first clumsy noises in this new quiet, my feet crunching on broken glass. A figure down the street, standing behind the counter of what used to be a coffee shop, froze. It had been wiping the counter with a cloth in a slow, monotonous loop. Its head snapped toward me, the motion unnaturally fast. It let out a shriek that was not human and charged, its body moving with an explosive, twitching speed. I stumbled backward over a pile of medical waste that had spilled from a bin. The thing lunged for me, but its foot tangled in a mess of electrical wiring on the ground. Its momentum carried it forward, and it stumbled past me, impaling itself through the chest on a jagged piece of exposed rebar. I lay on the ground, hyperventilating, my body splattered with its dark blood. I had survived by nothing more than dumb luck. A second shriek answered the first from farther down the street, then another. I saw a dozen heads turn in my direction. I had just announced my presence to every monster in the city. I scrambled back inside the hospital, slamming the heavy doors shut behind me. I leaned against them, my heart hammering against my ribs. The city was a death trap, and I was a fool. I thought about staying right there, inside the hospital's concrete shell. It was a tomb filled with the dead, but it was safe. I could find a room and lock the door and wait. But then my fingers closed around the keycard in my pocket. I felt the sharp edges of the plastic, and I saw the girl's face in my mind. The burning sensation on my palm returned, an insistent pull that was stronger than my fear. Staying here was a slow death for a man with no name. Leaving was a chance to find an answer, to find an identity, to find her. I chose the purpose I could feel over the safety of the void. I pushed myself off the doors and took the axe again. With the keycard in my pocket and a mission in my heart, I walked away from the hospital's main entrance, heading for a service exit in the back. As I reached the end of the block, I looked back one last time at the concrete tomb I had woken up in. High up, in a dark window on one of the upper floors, I saw a flicker of movement. It was a small, quick silhouette, and it was watching me go. Subject Prometheus, stand down. The voice was amplified, metallic, and it echoed from the broken concrete pylons all around us. We were trapped in the wreckage of a freeway underpass, a cage of rusted cars and shattered asphalt. And on the ridge above, figures in patched military gear had rifles aimed down at the girl. My girl. She froze beside me, her small body rigid, her wide eyes fixed on the soldiers who were a familiar kind of terror to her. They did not look at me. Their attention was entirely on her, this child I was sworn to protect. A woman with short gray hair stood slightly apart from the others, her posture one of command, and it was from a speaker near her that the voice had come. "We have you surrounded. Release the subject." I felt a surge of pure, protective anger, a clean fire that burned away my confusion. These people were hunters, and she was their prey. I had no weapon but the axe at my belt, and there were too many of them. My eyes darted around our concrete prison, seeking cover or an escape, and I saw none. Then my gaze lifted to the deck above, to the section of road that had collapsed, and I saw the yellow school bus. It was tilted at a dangerous angle, its front wheels hanging over the jagged edge of the broken highway, balanced on a fulcrum of twisted rebar. It was a weight waiting for a push, a very loud weight. The rule that had kept us alive for weeks screamed in my mind, the law of this dead world about silence. But the sight of those rifles leveled at my daughter was a louder scream. The girl, Atika, took a single step back, her filthy gray jumpsuit seeming to shrink around her. She made a sound, a tiny whimper that was swallowed by the heavy air. That sound was all the reason I needed. I shoved her behind a slab of fallen concrete, a temporary shield, and began to climb. My hands found purchase on exposed steel beams, and my feet found cracks in the wall. The soldiers shouted, but I did not hear the words, only the tone of alarm. I pulled myself up onto the broken deck, my muscles screaming in protest. The bus was right there, a sleeping yellow giant. I ran to its rear and put my shoulder against the cold metal. I pushed. The bus groaned, a deep, metallic sound of protest as it scraped against the asphalt. It barely moved. I braced my feet, digging the worn soles of my boots into the gritty surface, and I pushed again with everything I had, a roar building in my throat. The world narrowed to this single desperate act. Metal screeched on concrete as the bus slid another foot. A shot cracked through the air, then another, kicking up concrete dust near my head. I ignored them. I gave one final, violent shove. The bus tipped, its balance point crossed, and it plunged over the edge. It fell for a long second, a silent, impossible sight, before it slammed into the underpass below. The impact was a physical thing, a boom that shook the ground and sent a shock wave of air and dust rushing outwards. The sound was immense, a cataclysm of tortured, rending metal that crushed a dozen rusted cars beneath it. It was the loudest thing I had heard since I awoke in that silent hospital. For a moment after, there was a profound quiet. Then, from all directions, a new sound began. It was a chorus of dry, rasping shrieks, the call of the hollows, and it was coming from every ruined building and dark alleyway. I had rung the dinner bell for a square mile. The soldiers on the ridge were distracted, their formation breaking as they turned to face the new, immediate threat. That was our chance. I scrambled back down the concrete wall, dropping the last 10 feet and landing hard. I grabbed Atika's arm. She flinched violently at my touch, her whole body going stiff with resistance, but I held on. She looked from me to the uniformed soldiers on the ridge, and the familiar terror won. She ran with me. We darted through the maze of wreckage, heading for the darkest shadow I could see, a circular opening in a concrete wall. It was a storm drain. As we reached the entrance, the woman's amplified voice cut through the growing chaos of the approaching hollows, full of a piercing and personal hate. "Dr. Kahika, we know who you are." The name meant nothing to me. It was just another sound in a world of noise and danger. I pulled Atika into the round tunnel, into the sudden dark and the smell of rot and stagnant water. The shrieks of the hollows and the crackle of gunfire began to fade behind us as we plunged deeper into the earth. The darkness was absolute. I was still holding her thin arm, my grip a desperate anchor. After a dozen paces, when the sounds from outside were a distant echo, I stopped. My heart was a frantic hammer in my chest. I loosened my fingers and let her go. She did not stay. I heard the scuff of her shoes on the slick concrete and the splash of water as she scrambled away from me. She moved quickly into the oppressive blackness of the tunnel, putting a dozen feet of dark, foul-smelling air between us. I had just thrown a bus off a freeway to save her life, and she was looking back at me with more terror than she had ever shown the soldiers. Dr. Kahika. The name the woman shouted was a key, and it turned a lock in my mind that had been rusted shut for 3 years. In the foul darkness of the storm drain, the world I knew dissolved and was replaced by a flood of another life, a life of sterile white rooms and the cold glow of computer monitors. I saw myself, younger and harder, standing over a small girl strapped to a chair, my hand steady as I drew blood from her arm. I saw the girl's face, the same face as the child now cowering away from me in the tunnel, and there was no love in my eyes, only clinical assessment. I saw the complex viral models on a screen, the project name glowing in the corner, Nightingale. I saw the arrogance that made me bypass safety protocols, the rush to achieve a cure that led to a colleague's infected snarl as he lunged for me, and the blinding pain as my head struck the concrete floor. It all came back in a sickening rush. The girl in the locket was not my daughter. She was my subject, my experiment, the living incubator for a neutralizing agent I engineered. The paternal love I felt was a ghost, a fiction my broken mind had constructed around a single image to give itself a purpose. My name was Gautam Kahika, and I had ended the world in an attempt to save it. Kuhula Gataki was the head of security I had ignored. Her hatred was not random, it was earned. She was taking Atika not to harm her, but to finish my work, to extract the cure from her living tissue. Vivisection. A word from my old life, a cold and logical procedure. They were taking her to Point Reyes, the main CDC outpost, the only facility on the coast with the equipment to do it, the only place secure enough to hold her. My motivation inverted itself completely. The quest to find myself was over, and I was horrified by what I had found. Atonement was the only thing left. I would not save the world by sacrificing her again. I would save her from the world, and from the monster I had been. I stood up in the dark drain, the water sloshing around my ankles. Atika flinched, scrambling further away. I did not try to get closer. I turned and walked back toward the faint light of the entrance, leaving her in the dark. The sounds of gunfire and shrieking had faded. I emerged into the gray daylight and scavenged what I could from the wreckage of the firefight, taking a rifle and ammunition from a dead Aegis soldier. I stood on a ridge of broken highway and looked south along the cracked and empty road that followed the coastline. I was no longer a lost man hunting a ghost. I was a monster with a name, and I was hunting for a reckoning. The journey took days, moving through the silent, overgrown landscape with a purpose that felt like a blade in my gut. Point Reyes was a concrete fortress jutting out into the gray Pacific, surrounded by walls and fences. I knew its schematics because Omnigenics had shared security architecture with the CDC. I used the darkness to get to the outer wall and found a service conduit I remembered from the blueprints. Its cover was heavy, but the axe gave me the leverage I needed. Inside, the corridors were clean metal, lit by bright, unwavering lights. My old keycard was useless at the first checkpoint, my access predictably revoked. I pried the control panel from the wall and exposed the wiring inside. The system was a newer model, but the underlying principles were the same. I stripped 2 wires with my knife and used my keycard's chip to bridge a diagnostic circuit, causing the terminal screen to flicker to a command prompt. My fingers, clumsy from years of disuse, remembered the old override codes. I cloned the credentials of a low-level technician, and the heavy door slid open with a soft hiss. I moved from junction to junction, a ghost in the machine's nervous system, splicing cables and opening doors that were meant to keep the world out. Finally, I reached the observation booth for the primary containment lab. Through the thick glass, I saw her. Atika was strapped to a medical gurney in the center of the sterile white room. Doctors in clean suits moved around her, preparing instruments. And there, standing beside the gurney, was Kuhula Gataki. She looked at Atika, not with malice, but with a terrible, resolved purpose. I found the lab's intercom control on a nearby console and activated it. "Let her go, Kuhula." Kuhula's head snapped up, her eyes scanning the observation window. She saw me, and her face hardened into a mask of cold fury. She walked to a console in the lab and spoke, her voice crisp and clear through the speaker. "One life to save what's left of the world, Doctor. An equation you wrote yourself." I looked past her, at Atika on the gurney. Her eyes were wide with a terror that was ancient and familiar. She was not a variable in an equation. She was the child I had caged and tortured in the name of a greater good that never came. Kuhula was right. This was my choice, my logic, thrown back at me. And I rejected it. "I created a monster to save humanity," I said into the microphone, my voice steady. "Now I will be a monster to save her from it." I turned to the main facility control terminal in the booth. My cloned credentials were not high enough to simply unlock her restraints, but they were enough to access the facility's emergency protocols. I found the one I was looking for, a scorched earth contingency I had personally consulted on years ago. Cascade Failure Protocol. I typed the authorization key and slammed my palm on the confirmation button. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a piercing alarm began to scream throughout the entire facility. Red lights flashed, painting the white corridors in blood. On a monitor showing the lower containment levels, I saw the heavy magnetic locks on the hollow pens slide open. Every door in the facility, including the one to the lab, sealed shut with the definitive crash of heavy steel. The base turned on itself. Through the observation window, I could see the panic in the lab. The doctors backed away from Atika, looking for an escape that was no longer there. The sounds of gunfire and screaming echoed from the corridors. In the chaos, I bypassed the local lock on the lab door, and it slid open. I ran in, cut Atika's restraints with my knife, and pulled her from the gurney. Kuhula raised her sidearm, but a tremor shook the entire room as something heavy slammed against the lab's other door. Her attention was split. I did not hesitate. I pulled Atika with me, back out into the flashing red hallway, and towards an emergency maintenance tunnel, whose existence was not on any public schematic. We reached the heavy circular hatch, and I spun the wheel that sealed it. As we scrambled inside, an armored blast door slammed down at the end of the corridor, sealing us off from the screams and the carnage. We were safe, plunged into the sudden silence and deep dark of the tunnel. Atika looked up at me, her chest heaving, her expression impossible to read in the gloom. Then, from the darkness behind us, down the long concrete tunnel we thought was our escape, came a single, guttural shriek. The lockdown had not just trapped the Aegis with their demons, it had trapped us with one of ours. We stand on a seaside cliff, the Point Reyes facility, a silent concrete tomb behind us in the cold morning light. I doomed what was left of the world to save this one child. The full weight of my monstrosity and of my single act of atonement settled over me. I looked at her, at this small girl whose life I had ruined and then saved. I offered her my hand. She stared at it, the hand that had held needles and also the knife that cut her free. After a long moment, she ignored it and simply started walking north along the cliff's edge, forcing me to follow. Our journey was not over. It had just begun.